The morning sun cast
Move
long
out!
shadows
Let's go!
across the NATO training facility. As Sarah Mitchell stepped off the transport vehicle, her duffel
Team, move
bag
out!
slung over
Hostiles
one
inbound!
shoulder.
Yes, ma'am.
The Romanian
Flank secure.
countryside
Push to the
stretched
tent.
endlessly beyond the chain-link fences, but her attention was focused on the imposing concrete buildings ahead. At 28, Sarah had seen her share of military installations, but this joint training exercise felt different, more intense, more scrutinized. She adjusted her uniform jacket, making sure the sleeves covered the intricate tattoo that wrapped around her left forearm. The Ghost Hawk design had been with her for 7 years now, but its significance was something she kept buried deep. Most people saw her as just another communications specialist transferred from a quiet desk job in Germany. They had no idea about the classified missions, the night operations, or the reasons why she'd requested this transfer to what appeared to be a routine NATO exercise. Fresh meat, someone muttered as she walked past a group of soldiers lounging near the barracks entrance. Sarah kept her expression neutral, having learned long ago that reacting to such comments only made things worse. She dealt with skepticism and outright hostility throughout her career, particularly from those who couldn't see past her slight frame and quiet demeanor. The registration desk was manned by a bored-looking corporal who barely glanced up as Sarah approached. "Mitchell, Sarah J.," she announced, producing her orders. "Communications tech, right?" The corporal's tone suggested this was barely worth his time. "Bunk assignments are on the board. Mess hall serves until 1900. Try not to get in anyone's way." Sarah nodded curtly and collected her papers. As she turned to find her assigned quarters, she nearly collided with a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 30s. His uniform bore the insignia of a Navy SEAL commander, and his pale blue eyes seemed to take in everything about her in a single glance. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "You must be the new comm specialist we've been expecting." "Yes, sir. Sarah Mitchell reporting for duty." She stood at attention, noting how he carried himself with the confident ease of someone who'd seen real combat. "Commander Jake Morrison," he introduced himself. "I'll be running some of the tactical exercises you'll be supporting. Word of advice?" His expression grew serious. "Some of the teams here have been working together for months. They might not be immediately welcoming to changes in their communication protocols." Sarah appreciated his directness. "Understood, sir. I'm here to do whatever job needs doing." Something in her tone made Morrison pause, his eyes studying her face more carefully. There was something about this woman that didn't quite fit the profile of a typical communications transfer. Her posture, the way her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, the unconscious way she positioned herself with clear sight lines to exits. These were habits developed through experience, not training exercises. "Have we met before?" Morrison asked suddenly. "There's something familiar." "No, sir." "I would remember," Sarah replied quickly, perhaps too quickly. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks and hoped it wasn't obvious. Before Morrison could pursue the thought further, a commotion erupted from the direction of the training yard. Shouting voices carried across the compound, followed by what sounded suspiciously like a challenge being issued. Both Sarah and Morrison turned toward the disturbance. "Looks like the international cooperation is off to its usual rocky start," Morrison observed dryly. "Care to see what passes for diplomacy around here?" They walked together toward the source of the noise, where a crowd had gathered around two men facing off in the center of a dirt circle. One was clearly American, his uniform crisp despite the obvious tension in his stance. The other wore the distinctive pattern of British forces, his accent carrying clearly as he spoke. "I'm telling you, mate, your intelligence reports were complete rubbish," the British soldier was saying, his voice tight with frustration. "We lost 2 good men because someone couldn't be bothered to verify their sources. Our intel was solid," the American shot back. "If your team had followed the specified route instead of improvising, those casualties wouldn't have happened." Sarah could see this was about more than just a training exercise. Real operations were being discussed, real losses mourned, the kind of inter-service tensions that could undermine entire missions if left unchecked. "Gentlemen," Morrison stepped forward, his command presence immediately noticeable. The crowd began to quiet. "I suggest we table this discussion for the formal debrief." "With respect, Commander," the British soldier continued, "this isn't something that can wait for formal channels. We're talking about operational security failures that That should be discussed through proper channels. Morrison finished firmly. Sergeant Williams, Corporal Davies, you're both dismissed to your quarters. Cool-off period, effective immediately. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah noticed several soldiers casting glances in her direction. Not the casual curiosity she'd expected, but something more pointed. More suspicious. The new girl probably doesn't even know one end of a radio from the other, she heard someone mutter. Another desk jockey playing soldier, came another voice. Sarah kept her expression carefully neutral, but Morrison noticed the slight tightening around her eyes. Don't let them get to you, he said quietly. Half of them are just posturing anyway. I'm used to it, Sarah replied, though something in her voice suggested this particular dismissal stung more than usual. They continued toward the main complex, passing groups of soldiers from various NATO countries. Sarah noted the distinct clustering, Americans with Americans, British with British, Germans keeping to themselves, the kind of tribal behavior that made joint operations challenging even under the best circumstances. First major international exercise? Morrison asked as they walked. No, sir. I've participated in several joint training operations. Sarah's response was technically true, though it omitted the classified nature of most of her previous assignments. Good. Some of the protocols here can be challenging, especially when you're coordinating between different national systems. Morrison paused at the entrance to the communications building. Your quarters are in Building C, but you might want to check in with Technical Sergeant Reynolds first. He runs the comm center and tends to be particular about his equipment. Sarah nodded her thanks and watched Morrison disappear into the administrative building. She stood alone for a moment, taking in the scope of the facility. 3 main compounds, each housing different aspects of the operation. Training grounds that could simulate everything from urban warfare to mountain operations. And everywhere the subtle but unmistakable signs of a facility designed for more than routine exercises. The communications building was a study in organized chaos. Banks of radio equipment lined the walls, their displays creating a constellation of colored lights in the dim interior. Technical Sergeant Reynolds turned out to be a grizzled veteran in his late 40s, his skeptical expression suggesting he'd seen too many inexperienced operators make costly mistakes. So you're Mitchell, he said without preamble. Heard you've got experience with encrypted satellite communications. Yes, Sergeant. Multi-band frequency coordination and secure data transmission protocols. Reynolds raised an eyebrow. That's specific. Most comtechs just say they know radios. He gestured toward a complex array of equipment. Tell me what you see here. Sarah studied the setup for several moments, noting details that would escape most casual observers. Primary array appears to be configured for long-range strategic communications. Secondary systems look like tactical field units, probably for coordinating smaller team operations. The encryption modules. She paused, recognizing equipment that should have been classified above her supposed clearance level. Those are newer than what I expected to see in a training environment. Interesting. Reynolds' expression had shifted from skepticism to something approaching respect. Most people just see a bunch of blinking lights. You actually know what you're looking at. Before Sarah could respond, her attention was caught by a familiar sound, the distinctive whine of rotor blades approaching. Through the window, she could see a helicopter touching down on the landing pad, its markings indicating a high-priority arrival. Expecting someone important? She asked. Reynolds glanced outside, and his expression grew serious. That would be Colonel Peterson. Runs the whole show here. When he flies in personally instead of sending updates through channels, it usually means something significant is happening. Sarah watched as several figures disembarked from the aircraft, their body language suggesting urgency. Whatever was happening, it was clear that this NATO exercise was about to become considerably more complicated. Mitchell, Reynolds said, drawing her attention back to the equipment. I'm going to assign you to the night shift for now. Fewer people around, easier to learn the systems without everyone watching over your shoulder. Sound acceptable? Perfectly, Sergeant. I prefer working when it's quieter anyway. Good. Report here at 2100 hours. And Mitchell? Reynolds paused. I don't know what your background is, but you clearly know more than your file suggests. Just remember, around here, sometimes it's better to appear less competent than you are. Makes people underestimate you, which can be useful. Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. She'd learned similar lessons in environments where revealing too much capability could draw unwanted attention. The rest of the afternoon passed in routine orientation activities, facility tours, safety briefings, introductions to key personnel. But Sarah noticed undercurrents of tension throughout the compound, conversations that stopped when she approached, glances between personnel that suggested ongoing concerns beyond typical exercise logistics. During dinner in the mess hall, she found herself sitting alone while groups of soldiers clustered at other tables. The isolation wasn't unexpected, but it was still uncomfortable. She was picking at her meal when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up to see Commander Morrison holding a tray, his expression pleasant but unreadable. "Of course, sir." Morrison settled into the chair across from her, noting how she automatically positioned herself to maintain visual contact with most of the room. Another small detail that suggested more experience than her file indicated. "How's the first day treating you?" he asked. "About what I expected. New person, new protocols, natural caution from the established teams. You handle skepticism well. That's not always easy in environments like this." Sarah considered her response carefully. "I found that actions speak louder than words. People will judge based on performance, not promises." "True enough." Morrison studied her face as he spoke, though sometimes people's assumptions can be so strong that they miss obvious signs of competence. There was something in his tone that made Sarah look up sharply. Morrison was watching her with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Is there something specific you're trying to say, Commander?" "Just that first impressions can be deceiving. Take you, for instance." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Communications specialist, transferred from a quiet posting in Germany. Clean file, no dramatic incidents. But you move like someone who's seen real action. You position yourself tactically without thinking about it. And when you looked at that helicopter earlier, your first instinct was to identify potential threats in the landing pattern." Sarah felt her pulse quicken but kept her expression neutral. "I take security seriously." "So do I. Which is why I'm wondering what's not in your official file." The direct challenge hung in the air between them. Sarah realized she was at a crossroads. Continue the pretense of being just another communications technician, or acknowledge that there were aspects of her background that couldn't be discussed openly. "Some experiences don't make it into official records," she said finally. Morrison nodded slowly. "Understood. Just remember, in an environment like this, having people underestimate your capabilities can be dangerous. Sometimes it's better to let competent people know who they're really working with." Before Sarah could respond, an announcement crackled over the facility's public address system. "All personnel report to designated stations. Exercise parameters have been updated." Repeat, "All personnel report to designated stations immediately." The mess hall erupted into controlled chaos as soldiers quickly finished meals and headed toward their assignments. Morrison stood, his casual demeanor replaced by the focused intensity of a combat leader. "Looks like things are getting interesting," he said. "Be careful out there, Mitchell. And remember what I said about letting the right people know who you really are." As he walked away, Sarah sat alone for a moment, processing the conversation. Morrison clearly suspected there was more to her background than appeared in her file. The question was whether his suspicions would prove helpful or dangerous in whatever was about to unfold. She made her way to the communications building, noting the increased activity throughout the facility. Personnel were moving with purpose now. The casual atmosphere of earlier replaced by something approaching operational readiness. Technical Sergeant Reynolds was waiting for her when she arrived, his expression grim. "Change of plans," he announced. "You're not on the night shift anymore. We just got word that we need all comm specialists on active duty starting now." Whatever this exercise was supposed to be, it just became something else entirely. Sarah felt familiar adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. The sensation of transition from routine to operational, from safe to potentially dangerous. It was a feeling she knew well, even if she couldn't openly acknowledge why. "What do you need me to do?" "For starters, help me reconfigure these arrays for tactical field communications. We're about to support some operations that require absolute precision." Reynolds paused, studying her face. "Think you can handle working under pressure?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "I think I can manage." As she began working with the complex communications equipment, her sleeves rode up slightly, revealing just the edge of her tattoo. Reynolds noticed but said nothing, though his expression suggested recognition of something significant. Outside, the facility continued its transformation from training environment to something approaching actual operational status. Sarah worked steadily, her movements confident and practiced in ways that would have surprised anyone who still thought of her as just another communications technician. The ghost hawk tattoo remained hidden beneath her sleeve, its significance known only to her. But as the evening progressed and the complexity of the communications requirements increased, it became clear that her true background might not remain secret much longer. Whatever was happening at this NATO facility, it was about to test everyone involved in ways they hadn't expected. And Sarah Mitchell, despite her best efforts to remain invisible, was about to find herself at the center of events that would reveal exactly who she really was. The night shift brought an intensity that Sarah hadn't experienced since her last classified deployment. The communications center hummed with activity as encrypted messages flowed between command posts, field teams, and off-site headquarters. What had begun as a routine NATO exercise was rapidly evolving into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Sarah found herself assigned to coordinate communications between 3 separate tactical teams operating in different sectors of the training area. The complexity of managing multiple encrypted channels while maintaining operational security would have challenged even experienced operators, but she handled the workload with an efficiency that drew increasingly curious glances from her colleagues. "Mitchell, I need you to patch Team Alpha through to command." Technical Sergeant Reynolds called out from across the room. "They're reporting some kind of anomaly in their patrol sector." Sarah's fingers flew across the communication array, establishing the secure connection within seconds. As she monitored the transmission, her expression grew increasingly concerned. Team Alpha wasn't reporting a training scenario. Their voices carried the tension of soldiers who had encountered something genuinely unexpected. "Command, this is Team Alpha Leader. We have visual confirmation of unscheduled personnel in our sector. 3 individuals. Civilian clothing, advanced surveillance equipment. Request guidance on engagement protocols." The response from command was immediate and sharp. "Team Alpha, maintain observation distance, do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. Command is dispatching additional assets to your location." Sarah quickly switched to a different channel to relay the information to the response teams, but something about the situation felt wrong. Unscheduled personnel with surveillance equipment during a NATO exercise could mean anything from journalists to foreign intelligence operatives. Either way, it represented a serious security breach. "Reynolds," she called quietly, "you might want to hear this." The technical sergeant moved to her station, listening as she played back the recorded transmission. His face grew pale as he processed the implications. "Jesus," he muttered. "How the hell did unauthorized personnel get into a secure training area?" Before Sarah could respond, Commander Morrison's voice crackled over the facility-wide communication system. "All team leaders report to the command center immediately. All support personnel maintain current operational status until further notice." The urgency in Morrison's tone was unmistakable. Sarah continued monitoring the communications traffic, noting the subtle shifts in protocol that indicated the exercise had officially transitioned to a real-world security situation. "Mitchell," Reynolds said, "I'm going to need you to take primary responsibility for tactical communications while I brief the command staff. Think you can handle coordinating all teams simultaneously?" "Yes, Sergeant." The confidence in Sarah's voice surprised even her. She was falling back into patterns of behavior that belonged to a different part of her career, one that officially didn't exist in her current file. As Reynolds left for the command center, Sarah found herself alone with the most sophisticated communications array she'd worked with in months. Multiple teams were now operating in the field, their movements coordinated through her station. The familiar rhythm of tactical communications brought back memories she'd been trying to suppress. "Command, this is Team Bravo," came a new voice through her headset. "We're in position for perimeter sweep of the anomaly site, awaiting orders to proceed." Sarah quickly verified Team Bravo's encrypted identification codes before responding. "Team Bravo, maintain holding position. Command is coordinating with local authorities before authorizing advance." "Copy that, Control. Standing by." The next several hours passed in a blur of coordinated activity. Sarah found herself managing increasingly complex communication requirements as more teams were deployed to investigate the security breach. Her performance was flawless, handling multiple encrypted channels with the kind of expertise that typically took years to develop. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the first real crisis occurred. "Control, this is Team Charlie." The voice was tight with stress. "We have a man down." "Repeat, we have a casualty. Request immediate medical evacuation." Sarah's training kicked in instantly. "Team Charlie, this is Control. What is the nature of the injury?" "Sniper fire. We're taking fire from an unknown position. Johnson is hit in the shoulder, conscious but bleeding heavily." The word sniper sent chills through the communications center. This was no longer a security breach by curious civilians. It was an active combat situation. Sarah immediately opened emergency channels, simultaneously coordinating with medical teams, backup tactical units, and command headquarters. Her movements were precise and confident, the kind of multitasking that came from real-world experience under fire. Medical Team 1, you have priority tasking for casualty evacuation. Grid coordinates follow. Sarah rattled off the location data while simultaneously vectoring additional tactical teams toward Team Charlie's position. Team Delta, Control. You are to provide overwatch support for Team Charlie's extraction. Approach from bearing 270, maintain communication silence until in position. The organized chaos of combat communications filled the room as Sarah orchestrated the response to the crisis. Her performance was so smooth, so professional, that it would have been obvious to any experienced observer that she'd done this before. Many times. Commander Morrison appeared in the communications center just as Sarah was coordinating the successful extraction of the wounded soldier. He stood in the doorway for several moments, watching her work with growing amazement. "Team Charlie, medical evacuation is complete," Sarah announced. "Johnson is stable and en route to the medical facility." All teams maintained defensive positions until further notice. She looked up to find Morrison staring at her with an expression of dawning recognition. "Where exactly did you learn to coordinate tactical communications like that?" he asked quietly. Sarah realized she'd revealed far more capability than her cover story could support. The precision of her responses, the automatic use of proper military communication protocols, the calm efficiency under genuine pressure. All of it pointed to extensive combat experience. "I received comprehensive training in Germany," she said weakly. Morrison moved closer to her station, studying the multiple communication channels she was managing. "This isn't training, Mitchell. This is operational experience. Real-world, life-and-death operational experience." Before Sarah could respond, another urgent transmission crackled through the speakers. "Control. This is Colonel Peterson in the command helicopter. We have eyes on the sniper position. Single individual. Appears to be withdrawing toward the eastern tree line. All ground teams converge on grid 77 Alpha." Sarah immediately began coordinating the convergence, but Morrison placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let me take this," he said firmly. "Sir, I can handle—" "I know you can. That's exactly my point." Morrison's voice was quiet but intense. "The question is, who are you really?" The weight of his stare was making Sarah increasingly uncomfortable. She'd been careful to maintain her cover, but the crisis situation had forced her to react with instincts developed through years of classified operations. "I'm Communications Specialist Sarah Mitchell, assigned from—" Bullshit. Morrison's interruption was quiet but definitive. "I've worked with enough operators to recognize the real thing when I see it. Your movements, your communication protocols, your tactical awareness. None of that comes from a desk job in Germany." Sarah felt trapped. Maintaining her cover story was becoming increasingly difficult, but revealing her true background could compromise ongoing operations that extended far beyond this NATO exercise. "Commander, I understand your curiosity, but— Control, this is Team Echo." The urgent transmission cut through their conversation. "We've got multiple contacts approaching from the north. They're armed and moving with military precision." Sarah instinctively reached for the communication controls, but Morrison blocked her access. "Team Echo, this is Commander Morrison. What is your count on hostile contacts?" "Sir, we're seeing at least 6 individuals, possibly more. They're spread out in a tactical formation and appear to be heading toward the main facility." Morrison's expression grew grim. What had started as a security breach was rapidly escalating into a coordinated assault on the NATO facility. "All teams, this is command. Morrison announced. "We are now operating under Code Red protocols. This is not a drill." Repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah watched the organized response unfold, noting how Morrison's leadership transformed the scattered teams into a coordinated defensive force. His experience was evident in every decision, every order, every tactical adjustment. "Mitchell," Morrison said without taking his eyes off the tactical display, "I don't know what your real story is, but right now I need someone with your level of expertise managing these communications. Can I count on you?" The direct question forced Sarah to make a choice: continue the pretense and potentially compromise the safety of everyone in the facility, or acknowledge her capabilities and deal with the consequences later. "Yes, sir, you can count on me." Morrison nodded grimly. "Good. Take primary control of tactical communications. I'm going to coordinate with Peterson on the overall defense." As Morrison left to join the command team, Sarah found herself in full operational mode for the first time in months. The familiar adrenaline of combat situations flowed through her system as she managed multiple teams under genuine threat. "Team Alpha, adjust your position to provide crossfire coverage on the northern approach. Team Bravo, maintain overwatch on the eastern perimeter, but be ready to relocate if the situation develops." Her orders were precise and tactical, issued with the confidence of someone who understood combat dynamics at a fundamental level. The teams responded without question, recognizing competent leadership, regardless of its source. The assault developed over the next hour with professional precision that suggested the attackers were far from random terrorists or opportunistic criminals. Their movements showed military training and detailed knowledge of the facility's layout. "Control, this is Team Delta," came a tense voice through Sarah's headset. "The hostiles are using suppressed weapons and night vision equipment. These aren't amateurs." Sarah coordinated the defensive response while simultaneously tracking the attackers' movements through multiple team reports. The pattern that emerged was deeply concerning. The assault team was systematically probing for weaknesses in the facility's defenses. "Team Charlie, they're testing your sector now. Maintain position, but be ready for contact." "Copy. Control. We see movement at 200 meters. The first engagement was brief but intense. The attacking force was skilled and well-equipped, but the NATO teams had superior numbers and defensive positions. After 20 minutes of intermittent firefights, the attackers began withdrawing toward predetermined extraction points. "All teams, hostiles appear to be withdrawing," Sarah announced. "Maintain defensive positions but do not pursue beyond the perimeter." As the immediate crisis subsided, Sarah became aware of voices behind her. She turned to find Colonel Peterson, Commander Morrison, and several other senior officers watching her with expressions of intense curiosity. "Outstanding work," Colonel Peterson said. "Your coordination of the defensive response was exemplary." Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. I was just following standard protocols." "Those weren't standard protocols," Morrison interjected. "That was advanced tactical communication coordination, the kind they don't teach in basic communications training." Colonel Peterson's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mitchell, isn't it? I'd like to review your personnel file more carefully. Something about tonight's performance suggests there might be gaps in our understanding of your background." Before Sarah could respond, Technical Sergeant Reynolds returned from the command center. His face was pale and his expression suggested he'd learned something significant. "Colonel," Reynolds interrupted, "we've got a problem. The attackers weren't trying to breach the facility. They were conducting reconnaissance." "Reconnaissance for what?" Morrison asked. "Unknown, sir, but they deployed surveillance equipment during the assault. Whatever they were looking for, they probably found it." The implications hung heavy in the air. The assault had been a cover for an intelligence-gathering operation, which suggested the attackers knew exactly what they were looking for. "Mitchell," Colonel Peterson said suddenly, "during the crisis, you demonstrated familiarity with classified communication protocols that aren't included in standard NATO training curricula." Sarah realized her cover was completely blown. Her performance during the crisis had revealed knowledge and capabilities that couldn't be explained by her official background. "Sir, I can explain." "I'm sure you can, but not here and not now." Peterson's tone was professional but firm. "Report to my office at 0800 hours tomorrow. We're going to have a very detailed conversation about who you really are." As the senior officers dispersed to deal with the aftermath of the assault, Sarah found herself alone with Commander Morrison. He was studying her with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a complex puzzle. "You know," he said quietly, "there was something familiar about your voice when you were coordinating those teams. Something I couldn't quite place until now." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Morrison was clearly an experienced operator with connections throughout the special operations community. If he was starting to put pieces together, "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said carefully. Morrison shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. There was an operation about 18 months ago. Multinational task force, deep cover infiltration of a terrorist cell in Eastern Europe. The communication coordinator for that operation had a very distinctive style. Precise, calm under pressure with a particular way of managing multiple tactical frequencies." Sarah's blood ran cold. The operation Morrison was describing was one of her most classified assignments, something that officially never happened. If he'd been part of that mission, that operation never happened, she said automatically, the response drilled into her through years of security training. Officially, no. But unofficially, Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. The call sign for the communication coordinator was Ghost Hawk. Ring any bells? Sarah felt the world shift around her. Morrison not only knew about the classified operation, he'd made the connection between her performance tonight and her previous work. Her carefully maintained cover was completely shattered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with absolute certainty. "Tomorrow morning, when Peterson asks you about your background, you're going to have to make some very difficult decisions about what to reveal. But I want you to know something. If you are who I think you are, then tonight wasn't the first time you've saved lives through your work." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "By the way," he said without turning around, "Ghost Hawk was an impressive operation. Whoever coordinated those communications deserves recognition, even if it can never be officially acknowledged." As Morrison disappeared into the night, Sarah stood alone in the communications center, her mind racing. Her cover was blown, her background was about to be thoroughly investigated, and someone with detailed knowledge of her classified work was asking uncomfortable questions. She unconsciously rubbed her left forearm, feeling the outline of the tattoo beneath her sleeve. The Ghost Hawk design had been a way to honor fallen teammates from that Eastern European operation. But now it might become evidence in an investigation she wasn't prepared for. The facility was slowly returning to normal operations, but Sarah knew nothing would be the same after tonight. The crisis had forced her to reveal capabilities that couldn't be easily explained, and Morrison's recognition of her previous work meant her most carefully guarded secrets were no longer safe. As she prepared to shut down the communications equipment, she wondered what the morning would bring. Colonel Peterson's investigation would be thorough and professional, but it would also force her to confront aspects of her career that she'd been trying to leave behind. The Ghost Hawk tattoo seemed to burn against her skin, a permanent reminder of operations that officially never existed, and teammates who died in service to classified objectives. Tomorrow, she would have to decide how much of the truth she was willing to reveal, and what the consequences of that revelation might be. For now, all she could do was wait and prepare for the most difficult conversation of her military career. Sarah spent the remaining hours before dawn reviewing every detail of her cover story, trying to prepare for questions that could expose classified operations spanning several years. Sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of teammates from missions that officially never happened, heard Morrison's voice saying the words Ghost Hawk with unmistakable recognition. At 0745 hours, she stood outside Colonel Peterson's office, her uniform immaculate despite the sleepless night. Through the door's glass panel, she could see Peterson reviewing files with Commander Morrison and another officer she didn't recognize, a stern-faced woman with the bearing of senior intelligence personnel. "Enter," came Peterson's voice after her knock. The office was spartanly furnished but dominated by an impressive array of commendations and photographs documenting Peterson's extensive career. Sarah noted images from operations in Afghanistan, Iraq, and several locations she couldn't immediately identify. "Take a seat, Mitchell," Peterson said, his tone professional but not hostile. "I believe you've met Commander Morrison. This is Major Helen Carter from Defense Intelligence. Sarah's heart sank. DIA involvement meant this investigation would reach levels far beyond a simple personnel review. Major Carter's presence suggested they suspected her of much more than padding her resume. Before we begin, Peterson continued, I want you to understand that this conversation is being recorded and may be used in subsequent security reviews. You have the right to request legal counsel before answering any questions. I understand, sir. I don't require counsel at this time. Carter leaned forward, her gray eyes studying Sarah with clinical intensity. Miss Mitchell, your performance last night was extraordinary. The kind of extraordinary that suggests extensive experience with tactical communications under combat conditions. Experience that doesn't appear anywhere in your official record. Sarah had rehearsed responses for this line of questioning, but Carter's directness was unsettling. I received comprehensive training in Germany, ma'am. The programs there were quite thorough. Were they? Carter consulted her tablet. According to your file, you spent 18 months at a communications facility in Stuttgart. A quiet posting focused on routine coordination between NATO headquarters. Nothing in that assignment would explain your ability to coordinate multi-team tactical operations under fire. Morrison spoke for the first time. There's also the matter of your familiarity with classified communication protocols. Several of the procedures you used last night are above your supposed security clearance level. It's at the book It's About History and then a Western vision lead to a great decision that copies the American representative content. I may have picked up additional knowledge through informal training sessions, she said carefully. Informal training in classified procedures. Carter's voice carried a note of skepticism. That would represent a serious security breach, wouldn't it? Peterson intervened before Sarah could respond. Let's approach this differently. Mitchell, we're not trying to trap you. We're trying to understand who we're really working with. Last night's attack wasn't random. The precision of their operation, their knowledge of our facility layout, their use of the assault as cover for reconnaissance. All of this suggests we're dealing with professional intelligence operatives. Sarah nodded, unsure where Peterson was leading. Which means, Peterson continued, we need to know with absolute certainty that everyone in this facility is exactly who they claim to be. No hidden agendas, no undisclosed backgrounds, no surprises that could compromise operational security. The implicit threat was clear. If Sarah couldn't satisfactorily explain her background, she would be treated as a potential security risk. Morrison consulted his own notes. There's something else. Your communication style last night was distinctively familiar. It reminded me of an operation I was involved in about 18 months ago. Sarah forced herself to remain calm even as Morrison described details of the Eastern European mission that should have been classified beyond his access level. Multinational Task Force Deep Cover Infiltration, Morrison continued. The communication coordinator used very specific protocols, had a particular way of managing crisis situations, the same style you demonstrated last night. Carter was taking notes as Morrison spoke, her expression growing more interested with each detail. This operation, she interjected, what was the coordinator's call sign? Morrison's eyes locked on Sarah's face as he answered. Ghost Hawk. The name hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah felt her careful composure beginning to crack under the weight of their scrutiny. I'm not familiar with that designation, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Aren't you? Carter reached into her briefcase and produced a thick file. Because we've been reviewing communication logs from several classified operations over the past 3 years. Operations where the communication coordination showed remarkable similarities to your performance last night. Sarah realized they weren't fishing for information. They already knew far more than they were revealing. The question was how much they could prove, and what they intended to do with that knowledge. Peterson opened a different file. Tell me about your left forearm, Mitchell. The unexpected question caught Sarah off guard. Sir? You wear long sleeves even in warm weather. You unconsciously cover your left forearm when stressed. Either you're hiding an injury or there's something else you don't want people to see. Sarah felt trapped. The tattoo was physical evidence that could link her to operations these officers might already suspect her of participating in. I have a tattoo that some people might find unprofessional, she said finally. What kind of tattoo? Carter asked. Sarah weighed her options. Continued denial was becoming impossible, but full disclosure could compromise ongoing operations and endanger people still in the field. It's a hawk design. I got it to honor some friends I lost. Morrison leaned back in his chair, his expression confirming that her admission aligned with his suspicions. Friends lost where? The question forced Sarah to confront the central dilemma. These officers clearly had pieces of the puzzle already. Continued deception might be worse than partial truth. Eastern Europe, about 18 months ago. The admission seemed to release some tension in the room. Peterson nodded as if a theory had been confirmed. Were these friends lost during an official operation? Carter asked. That would depend on your definition of official. Carter and Peterson exchanged glances. Morrison spoke quietly. Ghost Hawk, if you are who I think you are, then you should know that we're not your enemies here. But we need to understand the full scope of the situation we're dealing with. Sarah looked around the room, studying the faces of 3 senior military officers who seemed to know more about her background than she'd expected anyone to discover. What exactly are you asking me? Peterson answered. We're asking you to tell us who you really are, what operations you've been involved in, and whether your presence at this facility represents any kind of security risk. And if I can't answer those questions, then you'll be transferred to a secure facility for extended debriefing. Carter said matter-of-factly, which would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Sarah realized she was facing a moment of truth that would determine the direction of her future. These officers had clearly done their research. Continued denial would only make things worse. If I answer your questions, she said carefully, what assurances do I have about how that information will be used? That depends entirely on what you tell us. Peterson replied, but I can promise you this. If you're honest with us, we'll work to protect your interests. If you continue to deceive us, you'll be treated as a security threat. Sarah took a deep breath, mentally preparing to cross a line she'd never expected to face. My real name is Sarah Mitchell. That part is true. But my background is considerably more complex than what appears in my file. Go on, Carter encouraged. I've been involved in classified operations for the past 4 years. Deep cover assignments coordinating communications for special operations teams, conducting missions that can't be officially acknowledged. Morrison nodded. The Eastern European operation? Among others. Afghanistan, Syria, 2 operations in Africa I can't discuss in detail. And the tattoo? Sarah unconsciously touched her left forearm. 3 teammates died during the Eastern European mission. The tattoo honors their memory. Peterson consulted his notes. Why the transfer to this NATO exercise? Seems like a step down from special operations. This was the question Sarah had hoped to avoid. The real reason for her transfer involved circumstances she wasn't ready to discuss with anyone. I requested reassignment to less intensive duties. Why? Carter's question was sharp. Sarah hesitated, then decided that partial truth was better than continued deception. The last operation didn't go as planned. I made some decisions that led to complications. My superiors felt I needed time away from active special operations. What kind of complications? Morrison asked. Sarah met his eyes, recognizing a fellow operator who would understand the weight of difficult choices made under impossible circumstances. I prioritized saving civilian lives over completing the mission objectives. It was the right thing to do, but it compromised the operation. The room was quiet for several moments as the officers processed her admission. Peterson was the first to speak. How many civilians? 47. Mostly women and children who would have been killed if we'd proceeded with the original plan. Carter made notes. And your superiors disapproved of this decision? They understood it, but they also recognized that I might not be suited for operations where mission success requires ignoring civilian casualties. Morrison's expression had shifted from suspicion to something approaching respect. So they reassigned you to communications support where you could use your skills without facing those kinds of choices. That was the idea. Peterson closed his file, which brings us to current circumstances. Last night's attack wasn't random. Someone with detailed knowledge of this facility and our operations coordinated that assault. We need to know if your presence here is connected to that attack. Sarah felt a chill of realization. You think I might be working for whoever attacked the facility? We think, Carter said carefully, that your real background makes you either a significant asset or a significant threat. We're trying to determine which. I can show you the tattoo, Sarah offered suddenly. If you know about the Eastern European operation, you'll recognize the design. Peterson nodded. That would be helpful. Sarah rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that covered much of her forearm. The Ghost Hawk design was immediately recognizable, a stylized raptor in flight, with details that would be meaningful only to someone familiar with the specific operation. Morrison studied the tattoo carefully. The wing pattern. That's the formation designation for the infiltration team. Yes. And the 3 small hawks below it? Martinez, Thompson, and Kowalski. The teammates we lost. Carter photographed the tattoo from several angles. This is quite elaborate. How long did it take to complete? About 6 hours. I had it done 3 days after we got back. Where? Sarah provided the name and location of the tattoo parlor, information that could be easily verified. Peterson leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Assuming your story checks out and will verify every detail, the question becomes what to do with you now. Sir, you're clearly overqualified for standard communications support. Your skills would be valuable in more demanding assignments. But your presence here during last night's attack raises questions about timing and coincidence. Morrison spoke up. There's another consideration. If someone is targeting this facility because of the personnel assigned here, then having an operator of Ghost Hawk's caliber available might be advantageous. Carter consulted her tablet. We'll need to verify your account through official channels. That will take some time. How much time? Sarah asked. 24 to 48 hours for preliminary confirmation. Complete verification could take weeks. Peterson stood, signaling the end of the initial interview. Until we have confirmation, you'll remain at this facility but with modified duties. No access to classified communications, no sensitive information, and you'll be accompanied by a security escort at all times. Am I under arrest? You're under investigation, Carter clarified. Your cooperation so far has been noted, but we need to be certain about your background before making final determinations. As Sarah prepared to leave, Morrison addressed her directly. For what it's worth, I believe your story. The details match what I remember from the Eastern European operation, but these procedures exist for good reasons. Sarah nodded her understanding. I appreciate your honesty about the situation. Peterson's final words followed her to the door. Mitchell, or Ghost Hawk, your skills impressed everyone last night. If your background checks out, there may be opportunities for you here that are more challenging than routine communications support. Outside Peterson's office, Sarah was met by a young military police officer who would serve as her escort. The investigation was clearly just beginning, but at least her most closely guarded secrets were finally in the open. The facility continued its normal operations around her. But Sarah knew everything had changed. Her carefully maintained cover was gone. Her real background was under official scrutiny, and her future would depend on how thoroughly the investigators could verify a career built on operations that officially never happened. As she walked toward her temporary quarters, accompanied by her escort, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that had led to this moment. She'd come to this NATO facility hoping to disappear into routine duties, but circumstances had forced her back into the spotlight. The Ghost Hawk tattoo was no longer hidden beneath her sleeve. For better or worse, she was about to discover whether revealing her true identity would prove to be salvation or destruction. The next 36 hours passed in a strange limbo of restricted movement and quiet observation. Sarah's military police escort, Corporal Jenkins, turned out to be professional but not unfriendly. He maintained proper distance while allowing her sufficient privacy in her quarters and during meals. What bothered Sarah most was the way conversation stopped when she entered rooms, the curious glances from personnel who had clearly heard rumors about her situation. She was reviewing technical manuals in the facility library when Commander Morrison appeared at her table, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Mind if I join you? He asked, setting 1 cup in front of her. Corporal Jenkins looked uncertain about the protocol, but Morrison outranked him significantly. Give us some space, Corporal. I'll take responsibility for the next 20 minutes. Jenkins moved to a table across the room, close enough to observe but far enough to provide privacy for conversation. How are you holding up? Morrison asked. I've been better, Sarah admitted. Waiting for investigation results isn't exactly comfortable. Morrison studied her face. You know, I've been thinking about that Eastern European operation, trying to remember details that might help confirm your story. Sarah tensed. And? I remember the communication coordinator saved our asses on at least 3 occasions. Split-second decisions that kept teams from walking into ambushes. Tactical adjustments that prevented casualties. Morrison paused. I also remember that the coordinator disobeyed direct orders to maintain calm silence during the extraction. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. That particular incident had been one of the most controversial aspects of the entire operation. I don't know what you're referring to, she said carefully. Sure you do. The extraction point was compromised. Command was ordering radio silence to avoid detection, but you broke protocol to warn the teams about the ambush. Morrison leaned closer. 3 teams would have been wiped out if someone hadn't taken that risk. The memory was vivid and painful. Sarah had faced court-martial proceedings for that decision, charges that were ultimately dropped when the operation's success became apparent. That decision led to complications, she said quietly. It also saved 18 lives, Morrison replied firmly, including mine. Sarah looked up sharply. You were on one of those teams? Team 3. We were walking straight into a kill zone when your warning came through. Morrison's expression was intense. So when I say I believe your story, I'm not just talking about professional assessment. I'm talking about personal experience. The revelation changed everything about their interaction. Morrison wasn't just investigating her background. He was a direct beneficiary of her previous actions. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I needed to be certain. The communication coordinator on that operation was identified only by call sign. No names, no faces, just a voice on the radio that kept us alive. Morrison smiled grimly. But some voices you don't forget. Corporal Jenkins was watching their conversation with obvious curiosity, but maintaining his assigned distance. What happens now? Sarah asked. Now we wait for official confirmation. But I've already sent some unofficial inquiries through channels I trust, people who were on that operation who can verify your identity. Before Sarah could respond, Major Carter appeared at their table. Her expression was neutral but purposeful. Mitchell, we need to speak. New developments. Morrison stood. I'll leave you to it. Actually, Commander, you should hear this too. Carter consulted her tablet. We've received preliminary confirmation of Mitchell's background from 2 independent sources. Sarah felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Confirmation meant validation, but it also meant greater scrutiny of her future assignments. However, Carter continued, there are some complications we need to discuss. The word complications sent a chill through Sarah. In her experience, complications usually meant someone wanted something from her. What kind of complications? She asked. The kind that suggest your presence at this facility may not be coincidental after all. Carter's statement hung in the air like an accusation. Morrison's expression grew serious. Explain, he said. We've been analyzing the intelligence gathered during last night's attack. The surveillance equipment they deployed was focused on specific areas of the facility, areas that would be relevant only if they were looking for particular personnel. Sarah felt the implications settling over her. You think they were looking for me? We think they were looking for someone with your skill set. Whether you specifically or just someone like you, we're not certain yet. Morrison frowned. That would mean they had advanced intelligence about personnel assignments. Exactly. Carter turned to Sarah. We need to know about your recent assignments. Anyone who might have reason to track your movements. The question touched on aspects of Sarah's career that were still classified. Operations that could be compromised if discussed in the wrong context. Most of my recent work has been classified beyond your clearance level, Sarah said. Not anymore. Carter produced an official document. As of this morning, you've been granted provisional access to discuss relevant operations for security purposes. Sarah reviewed the authorization, noting the high-level signatures that had approved this unusual clearance expansion. There was an operation in Syria 6 months ago, she began reluctantly. Communication support for a joint task force targeting a specific terrorist cell. Continue. The mission was successful, but during the operation we discovered the cell had connections to several European intelligence services, not friendly ones. Morrison was taking notes now. What kind of connections? Information sharing, equipment transfers, possibly personnel exchanges. The kind of cooperation that suggested someone was coordinating terrorist activities with state-level support. Carter's expression grew more concerned. Were these connections pursued? That was above my level. I provided communication support and filed reports, but follow-up investigation was handled by other agencies. Other agencies that might have reason to monitor your subsequent activities? The implication was clear. If foreign intelligence services had been connected to the Syrian operation, they might be tracking personnel who had participated in exposing those connections. It's possible, Sarah admitted. Morrison spoke quietly, which would explain how they knew to target this facility specifically. Carter consulted her tablet again. There's more. We've identified the equipment used in last night's surveillance. Russian manufacture, latest generation. Not the kind of gear available to typical terrorist organizations. Sarah felt pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fit together. You think a state actor is involved. We think someone with significant resources and sophisticated intelligence capabilities coordinated last night's operation, specifically to gather information about personnel at this facility. The conversation was interrupted by Colonel Peterson's arrival. His expression suggested urgent developments. We need to move this discussion to a secure location, he announced. We've received intelligence that changes everything about this situation. They relocated to a specially shielded conference room in the facility's most secure building. Peterson activated electronic countermeasures before speaking. 30 minutes ago, we intercepted communications indicating another operation is planned for tonight. Much larger scale, focused specifically on personnel extraction. Sarah's blood ran cold. They're coming back? They're coming back with enough force to overcome our defensive capabilities. And their communications specifically mentioned targeting the Ghost Hawk operator. The use of her call sign was chilling. Whoever was behind these operations had detailed intelligence about her identity and current location. Morrison spoke first. How many hostiles? Estimated 20 to 30 personnel with air support and heavy weapons. This isn't reconnaissance anymore. This is a military operation. Carter turned to Sarah. We need to know everything about your recent assignments. Any operation that might have made you a target for this level of interest. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. The Syrian operation was the most likely source, but there had been other missions with sensitive implications. There was something else. 3 months ago, I participated in an operation that intercepted communications between terrorist cells and what appeared to be official government channels. Which government? We were never told. The operation was compartmentalized, need-to-know basis only. But the communications suggested someone in a NATO country was providing intelligence to hostile forces. Peterson's expression grew grim. A mole operation. That was the implication. My role was purely technical, intercepting and decrypting communications. But the intelligence gathered could have exposed very sensitive relationships. Morrison connected the implications. If you helped expose a mole in NATO intelligence, that would certainly make you a target for elimination. Carter was already working on her tablet. We're going to need complete details about that operation. Personnel, objectives, outcomes, everything. Most of that information is classified beyond... Not anymore, Peterson interrupted. As of right now, you have full authorization to discuss any operation that might be relevant to tonight's threat. The gravity of the situation was becoming clear. Sarah's background had made her a target for forces willing to assault a NATO facility, to capture or eliminate her. Colonel, Morrison said, we need to consider evacuation options. Already considered and rejected. Moving her now would make her more vulnerable, not less. Our best option is to defend in place and use tonight's attack as an opportunity to gather intelligence about who's behind this. Sarah listened to them discuss her fate with growing unease. You're planning to use me as bait? We're planning to protect you while gathering information about a serious security threat, Peterson corrected. But yes, your presence will be the focal point of their operation. What if they succeed? What if they actually manage to extract me? Morrison's expression was reassuring. They won't. We'll have every advantage. Defensive positions, superior numbers, and advance warning of their plans. Carter looked up from her tablet. There's one more consideration. If foreign intelligence services are willing to risk this kind of operation to capture you, it suggests you have information they desperately need, or information they desperately want to prevent from being revealed, Peterson added. Sarah realized the full scope of her situation. She wasn't just a target, she was potentially the key to exposing a much larger intelligence operation. What do you need me to do? Peterson consulted his watch. For now, continue normal activities but under enhanced security. Tonight, when the attack begins, you'll be moved to the most secure location in the facility. And then? Then we see who's willing to die to get their hands on you. As the meeting broke up, Sarah found herself walking with Morrison toward her quarters. Corporal Jenkins maintained his escort position, but at a respectful distance. You know, Morrison said quietly, I've been in a lot of dangerous situations, but tonight feels different. How so? Usually when someone targets a specific person this aggressively, it's because that person has something they want, but sometimes it's because that person knows something they can't afford to have revealed. Sarah understood his meaning. You think they're planning to kill me, not capture me? I think we should be prepared for either possibility. They walked in silence for several minutes before Morrison spoke again. The tattoo, the Ghost Hawk design. Is there anything about it that might be significant beyond honoring your fallen teammates? Sarah touched her covered forearm unconsciously. What do you mean? Sometimes operators embed information in personal items, coordinates, frequencies, contact codes, things that might be valuable to hostile intelligence services. The suggestion sent a chill through Sarah. She'd never considered that her memorial tattoo might be interpreted as containing operational intelligence. It's just a design to honor the dead, she said. I believe you. But whoever's coming tonight might not. As they reached her quarters, Morrison offered final advice. Get some rest if you can. Tonight's going to test everyone's limits. Sarah watched him walk away, then entered her room under Corporal Jenkins' watchful eye. Outside her window, the facility was preparing for the most serious threat it had ever faced. Her reflection in the window showed a woman who had tried to escape her past, only to discover that some secrets never stayed buried. The Ghost Hawk tattoo was no longer just a memorial, it had become a target. Tonight would determine whether her attempt to find peace in routine assignments had been a tragic mistake, or whether her specialized skills would once again prove crucial in the fight against forces that operated in the shadows of international relations. The sun was setting over the NATO facility, and Sarah knew that darkness would bring answers to questions she'd never wanted to ask. Darkness fell over the NATO facility like a heavy blanket, bringing with it tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the compound. Sarah sat in the secure communications bunker, surrounded by enough electronic countermeasures and reinforced concrete to withstand anything short of a direct missile strike. Commander Morrison and Technical Sergeant Reynolds flanked her position, while Colonel Peterson coordinated the facility's defense from the main command post. Contact, came the voice through Morrison's earpiece. Multiple aircraft approaching from the northwest. Estimated time to target, 15 minutes. Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat adrenaline beginning to flow through her system. Despite the circumstances, there was something oddly comforting about being back in an operational environment, surrounded by competent professionals preparing for combat. All defensive positions report ready. Peterson's voice crackled through the bunker's communication system. Remember, our primary objective is to protect the asset and gather intelligence on the attacking force. Lethal force is authorized. Morrison checked his weapon one final time. How are you holding up? Better than I expected, Sarah admitted. It feels strange to be the center of someone else's operation instead of coordinating it myself. You're not just the center of it, Reynolds interjected, adjusting communication settings. You're the reason it's happening. Before Sarah could respond, the facility's air defense systems activated, with a distinctive whining sound that indicated incoming aircraft. Through the bunker's reinforced observation window, they could see tracer rounds lighting up the night sky. Contact! Peterson's voice was sharp with urgency. Hostile helicopters engaging our perimeter defenses, ground teams deploying from multiple points. The sound of automatic weapons fire began to echo across the compound as the facility's defensive teams engaged the attacking force. Sarah found herself automatically analyzing the tactical situation based on the sounds reaching the bunker. 2 helicopters at least, probably 3, she observed. The firing pattern suggests they're using suppressing fire to cover personnel deployment rather than attempting to destroy defensive positions. Morrison glanced at her with surprise. You can tell all that from the sound? Audio pattern recognition was part of my training. Different aircraft have distinctive rotor signatures. Weapons have identifiable firing rates. Sarah paused, listening carefully. They're not trying to take the facility. They're trying to create enough chaos to extract one person, you. The confirmation sent chills through the bunker. Outside, the battle was intensifying as the attacking force pressed their assault with professional precision. Team Alpha is taking heavy fire, came an urgent transmission. We need immediate support at the north perimeter. Morrison activated his communication system. Team Delta provides support to Alpha's position. Team Echo, maintain overwatch on the eastern approach. Sarah watched Morrison coordinate the defensive response with the same calm efficiency she demonstrated 2 nights ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now dependent on the kind of tactical leadership she'd provided for others throughout her career. "Commander!" Reynolds called out, monitoring multiple communication channels simultaneously. "The attackers are using military-grade encrypted communications. This isn't a terrorist operation." Morrison's expression grew more serious. "Can you break their encryption?" "Not with standard equipment. But I'm detecting pattern similarities to Russian military communication protocols." The revelation confirmed what they'd suspected. This was a state-sponsored operation with significant resources and sophisticated planning. "Control, this is Team Charlie," came another transmission. "We've got visual on hostile ground teams advancing toward the central complex. They're moving in coordinated formations with military precision." Sarah stood up suddenly, studying the tactical display that showed the facility's layout and current positions of defending teams. "They're making a mistake," she announced. Morrison looked up from his communication console. "What do you mean?" "Look at their approach pattern. They're advancing on multiple fronts, but they're avoiding the communications building where I was working yesterday. They think I'm still there." Reynolds studied the display. "She's right. They're concentrating their assault on areas where a high-value target would logically be secured. Which gives us an advantage," Morrison realized. "They're wasting resources attacking hardened positions while their real objective is safely secured here." Sarah felt a familiar tactical clarity settling over her mind. "We could use that against them." "How?" "Redirect their attention. Make them think I've been moved to a different location. Draw their forces away from the defensive positions that are taking the heaviest casualties." Morrison shook his head. "Too risky. Peterson's orders are to keep you secure here. Peterson's orders assume a static defensive strategy. But if we can manipulate their tactical decisions, we can reduce our casualties while gathering more intelligence about their capabilities." Before Morrison could respond, Peterson's voice crackled through the communication system with obvious urgency. "All units, hostile forces have breached the north perimeter. They're advancing on the communications building with heavy weapon support." The sound of explosions began to reach the bunker as the attacking force used demolition charges to clear defensive obstacles. Sarah could tell from the tactical chatter that the facility's defenders were being overwhelmed at key points. "Morrison," she said urgently, "people are going to die defending empty positions. Let me help coordinate a response." "You're not authorized. Authorize me." Sarah's command presence filled the bunker. "I've coordinated defensive operations before. I can help save lives." Morrison hesitated for several crucial seconds, then made a decision that would determine the outcome of the battle. "Do it," he said, activating a secondary communication console. "But you follow my tactical oversight." Sarah moved to the console with practiced efficiency, her fingers flying across the controls as she established communication with all defensive teams simultaneously. "All units, this is Control," she announced, falling back into her Ghost Hawk operational identity. "We are implementing tactical redeployment. Team Alpha, withdraw to secondary positions and prepare for flanking maneuvers." The response from the teams was immediate and professional. Sarah's voice carried the confidence and authority that came from extensive combat experience. "Team Bravo, the enemy is advancing on predetermined objectives. Let them take those positions, then initiate crossfire from concealed positions." Morrison watched her work with growing amazement. This was Ghost Hawk in full operational mode, and the transformation was remarkable. The quiet communications technician had become a tactical commander coordinating a complex defensive operation. "Team Charlie, prepare to simulate communications equipment evacuation from the main building. Make it obvious. Make it look urgent." "Control, this is Team Charlie leader. Are we actually evacuating equipment?" "Negative. You're creating the appearance of evacuation to draw enemy focus away from your defensive positions. Reynolds was monitoring enemy communications as Sarah coordinated the deception operation. They're taking the bait, he reported. Hostile forces are redirecting toward the communications building. Sarah continued her tactical orchestration, using the attacking force's assumptions against them. Within 20 minutes, she had maneuvered the enemy into a kill zone while repositioning the facility's defenders to minimize casualties. All teams' enemy forces are now concentrated in Grid 7 Alpha. Initiate synchronized assault on my mark. Morrison could hear the change in tempo as the battle shifted from desperate defense to coordinated counterattack. Sarah had turned the facility's apparent weakness into a tactical advantage. Mark. Execute assault. The coordinated response was devastating. Caught in exposed positions while pursuing what they thought was their primary objective, the attacking force found themselves surrounded and outgunned. Control. This is Team Alpha Leader, came an excited transmission. Enemy forces are withdrawing. Repeat. Hostile forces are in full retreat. Sarah monitored the tactical situation as the assault collapsed. The attacking helicopters were pulling back, covering the retreat of ground forces who had failed to achieve their primary objective. All teams, do not pursue beyond the facility perimeter. She ordered, maintain defensive positions and prepare for possible secondary assault. As the immediate crisis subsided, Morrison stared at Sarah with undisguised admiration. That was incredible, he said. You turned a potential disaster into a tactical victory. Sarah was still monitoring communication channels, ensuring the withdrawal was genuine rather than a tactical feint. It's not over yet. Professional forces don't give up after one failed attempt. Colonel Peterson's voice came through the communications system with obvious relief and excitement. Outstanding work, Control. Preliminary reports indicate minimal friendly casualties and significant intelligence gathered on hostile capabilities. Reynolds looked up from his monitoring equipment. I'm detecting encrypted communications between the withdrawing forces and what appears to be a command post approximately 50 kilometers north of here. Can you track the communication source? Sarah asked. Already working on it. If they maintain communications during their withdrawal, we should be able to identify their base of operations. Morrison activated his communication link to Peterson. Colonel, we have an opportunity to track the hostile forces to their source. Request authorization to monitor their retreat communications. Authorized. Whatever intelligence you can gather could be crucial for understanding the scope of this threat. Sarah continued working the communication console, but her role had shifted from tactical coordination to intelligence gathering. Her expertise with encrypted communications proved invaluable as she tracked multiple enemy frequencies simultaneously. I'm detecting at least 3 different command hierarchies, she reported. This wasn't just a single operation. It was coordinated between multiple organizations. Military and intelligence services? Morrison asked. Definitely military coordination, but some of the communication protocols are civilian intelligence, probably a joint operation between different agencies. The implications were staggering. Multiple foreign intelligence and military organizations had coordinated an assault on a NATO facility specifically to capture or eliminate one communication specialist. Colonel, Morrison said into his microphone, we need to discuss the broader implications of tonight's operation. This was much larger than we initially understood. Peterson's response was immediate. Agreed. All personnel involved in tonight's defense are to be debriefed immediately. And Morrison? Yes, sir. Tell Ghost Hawk that her tactical coordination probably saved a dozen lives tonight. Sarah looked up from her console, suddenly aware that her cover identity was now permanently behind her. The crisis had forced her to reveal capabilities that couldn't be hidden or explained away. I suppose there's no point in maintaining the communications technician story anymore, she said. Morrison smiled. I think that particular cover was blown about 30 minutes into tonight's operation. Reynolds began shutting down the communication equipment as reports came in from around the facility. The attack had been repelled with minimal casualties. Intelligence had been gathered on a significant international threat, and questions about Sarah's background had been definitively answered. So, what happens now? Sarah asked. Morrison consulted his watch. Now we spend the next several hours in detailed debriefings about everything that happened tonight. Then I suspect you'll be offered assignments that make better use of your actual capabilities. Meaning? meaning Sarah Mitchell, communications technician, is officially retired. But Ghost Hawk might have a very interesting future ahead of her. As they prepared to leave the bunker, Sarah reflected on the strange turns that had brought her to this moment. She'd come to the NATO facility hoping to escape her past and find peace in routine assignments. Instead, she discovered that some skills couldn't be hidden and some backgrounds couldn't be escaped. The Ghost Hawk tattoo was now visible on her rolled-up sleeve, no longer a secret to be concealed, but a symbol of capabilities that had proved crucial when lives were at stake. Outside the bunker, the facility was returning to normal operations, but Sarah knew nothing would be the same. The mockery and skepticism she'd faced during her first days had been replaced by respect and recognition of her true abilities. Commander Morrison walked beside her as they headed toward the debriefing sessions, his earlier suspicions replaced by professional admiration. "You know," he said, "I never properly thanked you for the Eastern European operation, for the warning that saved Team 3. Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You don't need to thank me. It was just doing my job. Maybe. But tonight proved that just doing your job for someone like you means the difference between mission success and disaster." As they entered the administrative building, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a window. The woman looking back at her was no longer hiding her identity or minimizing her capabilities. For better or worse, Ghost Hawk was back. The next few hours would bring detailed questions about the night's events, official recognition of her role in the facility's defense, and discussions about her future assignments. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt like herself again. The attempts to mock and dismiss her had ended the moment she'd proven who she really was. The Ghost Hawk tattoo that had once been a painful reminder of loss had become a symbol of strength that had helped save lives when it mattered most. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the best way to escape your past is to embrace it completely.